The investigation was done properly until Barry Krischer got involved. Was he trying to hide something? I don't know. But when you agree to do an investigation and prosecute, and then you don't, something is wrong.
All of that work by the Palm Beach Police Department, and the prosecutor just lets him skate. It's unconscionable.
Rightfully frustrated, Chief Ryder asks the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Palm Beach to open a federal investigation.
The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida was a man named Alexander Acosta. Now, this is a guy who had cut his teeth on prosecuting Cali and Medellin drug cartels. He seemed like just the guy to take on Jeffrey Epstein and finally get some justice for these young girls.
When Chief Ryder goes to the U.S. Attorney's Office, U.S. Attorney Acosta promised him that he's going to prosecute this to the fullest extent.
When the FBI began their investigation, they began to re-interview a lot of the young victims that Joe Terry had already spoken with. In addition to that, they found additional victims that Jeffrey Epstein had abused. Ultimately, we were trying to fight on behalf of these young girls and trying to get some measure of justice.
The federal investigation goes on for 2 full years.
They come up with 40 women, and they had a 53-count indictment ready to go against Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's looking for a powerful Republican to get him off the hook. And guess who he hires? Ken Starr.
Ken Starr. I mean, this was the prosecutor, the special prosecutor who went all in on the Clinton impeachment, which was effectively a case about sex between 2 consenting adults. And here, on the other hand, you've got Jeffrey Epstein, who is suspected of raping and molesting 40 children. Starr and Dershowitz. It doesn't get bigger than that in the legal world. Only somebody with an endless supply of money and power could assemble a team like that. And it really began to beg the question, where was Jeffrey Epstein getting all his money?
Epstein's accumulation of real wealth begins after he managed to avoid charges in the Towers Ponzi scheme. He soon sets his sights on his next mark, a well-known billionaire.
Leslie Wexner is a retailing tycoon who owns a company that owns a lot of the stores you'll see in an American shopping mall, from Victoria's Secret to The Limited, Structure, Abercrombie & Fitch.
Les Wexner had fired some financial guy, and he needed a replacement. And somebody recommended Jeffrey Epstein.
Wexner trusted Epstein with the running of his investment funds, his trust funds, his foundations. Epstein was the fixer.
Soon, Wexner grants Epstein full power of attorney, which allows Epstein to make financial decisions for Wexner.
Jeffrey Epstein is overseeing, in that 1 year alone, almost $250 million of stock transactions for Wexner, which is about $475 million today. In that year, Jeffrey Epstein is in a 1-bedroom apartment. He suddenly buys an airplane. He hires a full-time pilot. He starts liquidating large amounts of Leslie Wexner stock holdings. And shortly after all these stock transactions, Epstein, like clockwork, will purchase a ranch, purchase an island.
One of the biggest issues is if you have too much money, most likely you won't miss it if some is taken from you. That's very important. And you become the perfect victim for frauds and identity theft.
Working for Leslie Wexner, Epstein is suddenly showered with hot and cold running money. And in 1995, Wexner bestows upon his financial advisor a magnificent gift, a $70 million Manhattan mansion.
It was rags to riches in 24 hours. Few people with that kind of trajectory in history and lack of formal education get these kind of opportunities, which goes back to the question, why in fact did Leslie Wexner trust a man who was fired from the investment house with $1 billion? That's a lot of money.
The rumor mill really went into overdrive on this one. Did Jeffrey Epstein have something on Les Wexner? Or were the two of them at any point maybe involved together in something unsavory? I mean, that was what people were talking about.
However he got so rich, Epstein did build a massive power base of wealth and personal connections so he could live his life any way he wanted and squash anybody who got in his way.
Federal authorities in Florida quietly work the case for 2 years, an investigation that barely makes the news. They find 40 victims claiming they were forced into Epstein's sex trafficking ring. Then, the financier turns up in the Palm Beach County Courthouse.
This doesn't make any sense at all. None of the alleged victims are present. And if he's still under a federal investigation, then what on earth is he doing in a state courthouse?
Despite the massive amount of evidence of sex trafficking, Epstein is somehow given a remarkable deal.
The U.S. Attorney's Office and Epstein's lawyers enter into a sweetheart deal, which is called the non-prosecution agreement.
He agrees to 1 count of felony prostitution and 1 count of soliciting a minor.
There's no such thing as a child prostitute. If you're 14, you are not a prostitute. You are a child. You don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. It's ridiculous calling them prostitutes. They're a victim of sex trafficking.
On June 30th, 2008, Epstein agrees to an 18-month sentence after U.S. Attorney Acosta agrees to drop all federal charges.
The non-prosecution agreement gives immunity to not only Epstein, but all potential co-conspirators, which was unbelievable to us as lawyers at the time.
This is where it gets really ugly. In conversations with the authorities, Epstein's lawyers actually make the case not to tell the victims about any of it, not to involve them. Nothing. They hear nothing.
Acosta apparently agrees, despite the fact that the decision could be in violation of the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act. The secret plan to exclude the victims is not reported in the press until after it's all done.
The victims, they're supposed to be told about any plea deals or any type of sentencing and have some kind of input, whether real or symbolic. And they were totally kept in the dark about everything.
The victims were willing to fight, they were willing to go on the record, and they were not even contacted as the law required to get their approval.
The only reason that Epstein got the deal he got was because of his money, his power, and his influence. You take any other person off the street and they're accused of molestation or sexual abuse of one girl. They end up behind bars for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. In 25 years, I'd never seen a non-prosecution agreement that broad. The only thing we could rationalize in our mind was that maybe the U.S. government was getting something out of this deal. Maybe he was an informant. It was during the huge financial crisis and the stock market crash. So maybe he was giving information to the federal government for prosecutions of financial crimes. We had heard that he was maybe an informant working with the Israeli government, and that's why they treated him the way they did. We never truly learned the reason why they backed down the way they did.
A deeper dive into Epstein's history might provide clues as to how he became so powerful, so fast. Jeffrey Epstein's unusual meteoric rise has made him rich. But the boy from Coney Island doesn't exactly fit in with the high society crowd.
He was always just trying to build himself up. Jeffrey Epstein was definitely insecure. And I think he needed all this aggrandizement because really he was born a simple guy.
It was in the early 1990s that Jeffrey Epstein meets Ghislaine Maxwell, and she is his ticket to high society.
Ghislaine Maxwell, she was a socialite. She was very well known and followed by the British tabloids. And she is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was a press baron in the United Kingdom. He owned the Daily Mirror group of newspapers. And so he was a very wealthy, connected person. He named his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, after his favorite daughter.
Ghislaine, as a young girl, she had a very wealthy life. She was part of one of the richest families in Britain at the time, and she really had whatever she'd wanted.
I'm Laura Goldman, and in the 90s, when I met Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, I was a stockbroker. Ghislaine is a very accomplished woman, went to Oxford. She speaks several languages. Basically, you would see Ghislaine at the opening of everything. If there was a gold envelope, she was there. She was part of the scene. She liked to party. She was a good time girl.
My name is Christina Oxenberg. I'm a writer by trade. I am a cousin of Prince Andrew. And in 1990, I met Ghislaine in America at a super ritzy party. And I was there with my husband, and they knew each other. And so as she walked over and he said, "Oh, Ghislaine, hello." She did a bizarre little performance. She looked at me and she looped her arm in his and she said, "Who is that?" I was getting ready to divorce this guy anyway, so I thought it was quite funny.
Ghislaine was living the good life, bouncing between London and New York. And then it all came crashing down.
In 1991, Robert Maxwell was sailing a yacht in the Canary Islands, and he drowned.
His body was found by the Spanish Navy, and there's conflicting information about exactly how he died.
Robert Maxwell was on his yacht. He either fell over, attempted suicide, or was murdered.
A conspiracy theory arises as to why he might have been killed.
I know from Jewish sources that Robert Maxwell was a spy for Israel, and many people have also told me that he possibly sold information to other governments.
Some believe his secret life might have led to his demise. Others think the impending discovery of shocking crimes might have led to suicide.
After he died, it was discovered that he had robbed his own employees' pension funds to prop up his businesses.
Ghislaine believes he was murdered. She doesn't believe that he would have ever committed suicide.
When Maxwell's global media empire collapses, Ghislaine flees the UK media frenzy for New York in hopes of reclaiming her status.
I think the death of her father affected her in every possible way, especially financially. She lost her money. She felt she lost her identity. Ghislaine calls me and invites me to a tea party at her apartment, and her behavior is bizarre. She just simply was dressed in white bra and her underwear. Very pretty underwear, but underwear. And 3 other girls, we're all dressed. She's very chatty, and she's saying that she's broke, and I think she thought I would be of some use to her.
A close friend of hers introduces her to Jeffrey Epstein at a dinner, and that's where their relationship begins.
Epstein had just really hit pay dirt in terms of managing Leslie Wexner's money. So Ghislaine comes over, and they appear to be dating.
By now, Ghislaine knows everybody, and she introduced him to everybody. Her entire network.
Ghislaine has a way, people call it charm, I would call it theater. And she's working constantly to make you laugh, make you comfortable, draw you in. She is the grifter, 100% grifter, and she's fairly good at it. And Jeffrey had like a list, like a wish list of the type of person he wanted brought in.
She introduces him to the Duke of York, Prince Andrew. And it's right around that time that he's starting to cozy up with the likes of Bill Clinton and one very wealthy and powerful playboy and real estate mogul in New York, Donald Trump.
Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are frequent visitors to Mar-a-Lago, a resort that Donald Trump owned and turned into a club.
Soon, Maxwell moves into Epstein's 71st Street mansion. Over time, Epstein and Maxwell's relationship evolves from dating and networking into something more sinister.
Maxwell became the mistress of the house. She would also procure the girls that she felt he would like.
She says he has an incredible sex drive. He has to have 3 orgasms a day. So I help him out by bringing in the females. She felt no compunction about telling me this. If anything, she was proud.
He's been hiding his sexual proclivities from, the people he doesn't want to know. But at the same time, he's wriggling his way into the upper echelons of New York society, toast of the town. At one point, he even became a board member of the New York Academy of Art.
My name is Maria Farmer. I am the first person who reported Jeffrey Epstein to local authorities and the FBI. In the 1990s, I was in graduate school in Manhattan at the New York Academy of Art. It had been a dream of mine my entire life, not only to live in Manhattan, but to be an artist, a painter in New York City.
In 1995, Maria meets Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at an Academy event.
They have a graduation, and everyone puts their paintings up, and it's kind of a gallery exhibit. It was the only time I got to hang my paintings in a gallery.
Epstein zeroes in on one of Maria's paintings, which features a young girl on a couch with a man watching her.
Maria explains that the model for this piece of art was her little sister, Annie.
I had no idea who they were. Jeffrey said that he didn't typically appreciate beautiful work, but he found my work both compelling and beautiful. He said with my work, he appreciated it because it would get him thinking.
The wealthy financier makes a cut-rate offer, half the price.
He struck me as very cheap to ask for a discount from a student. But Jeffrey said, I'm giving you a great opportunity. With the discount you offer me, I'm going to be giving you the best opportunity.
Epstein offers the struggling art student a job.
He said, show up at 8 o'clock in the morning at the mansion.
Maria's new job, receptionist.
My only duty was to sign people in and sign them out as they left. Elan came in and she gave me all the instructions as to how to behave and how to speak to people and breathe, basically. She was also the one who was first showing me all the pinhole cameras next to the desk. I mean, he was very silly about it too and very proud of this, but right next to my head were several little pinhole cameras. I saw a lot of children coming in, a lot of children, little girls. I remember thinking, how can this many young girls be coming and going? What is the deal? Elan said, they're Victoria's Secret models, Maria. And I believed her. Why would I not believe her, right? I mean, I know nothing about modeling. I know about art.
Soon Maria realizes working a billionaire's front desk isn't exactly her dream job.
I mean, here I was. I just received a master's degree in painting, and this job really made no sense for me. And I stayed with it for months because I was just destitute.
Then Epstein begins asking about Maria's family.
Maria Farmer has a 15-year-old sister, Annie Farmer, and Epstein and Maxwell get giddy and excited about this, and they want to meet her. So they represent to the mother that there's going to be like a scholarly conference for aspiring college students, and that they want to help Annie pay for college and that she should travel abroad so that she can get the type of resume that would look good to an Ivy League college.
I did not know that he was evil. I just didn't see it.
She worked at that unrewarding front desk job for several months, but then she got a fateful phone call. She got a job offer to do a series of paintings for a Hollywood movie.
I said, I no longer want to work for you at this desk. I got a new job doing these paintings. I didn't really have the space in my apartment, but I was going to make it work. But instead, Jeffrey said, you know what? I have an incredible house on my friend's property. He gave it to me. It's Les Wexner's house. You can stay there and paint. I thought this might be a really good experience. That was the beginning of the worst time of my life. And I was never safe again.
In the summer of 1996, Maria Farmer sets up her art studio at an Epstein home nestled on the property of Les Wexner, the billionaire CEO of L Brands and Victoria's Secret.
Jeffrey said, "This is where the Victoria's Secret models stay, totally safe and beautiful."
According to Maria, what starts as a dream chance to finally focus on her art quickly becomes a nightmare. Maria makes serious allegations against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell.
There are pinhole cameras throughout that house in New Albany. And I know this for a fact because Ghislaine and Jeffrey told me. And they also wanted to make it really clear that I was being watched. Jeffrey and Ghislaine came to visit a couple times at the estate one night. Ghislaine called me in and she asked me to come with she and Jeffrey for a second, that Jeffrey needed to talk to me. And so I walked just down this hallway. This room I was never allowed to go in because it was Jeffrey's room. Ghislaine was in a robe and she walked me around the 4-poster bed and she wanted me to rub his feet. And I remember him moaning and being very dramatic. And so I said, I think I'm not very good at this. He put his hand like this and started harming me, like on my chest. And she went like this and mirrored him. So they were both like twisting me on my chest, and it was really strange, and I felt really uncomfortable and embarrassed, right? And at one point I started, like, tears started to come out, and she took my hand and was like rubbing it and being all disgusting and like, kissed my hand. And I remember thinking she was so disgusting. And that was for me the greatest moment of horror.
Maria says she managed to run away and hide in her bedroom.
I remember thinking that I was going to die too, and thinking about my mother and how my mom was going to handle this.
The next morning, Epstein and Maxwell leave early for the airport.
Jeffrey called me to tell me he'd had a great time the night before. And I just started sobbing, and I'm like, I quit. I hung up. Ghislaine called and was screaming at me. I was able to fight my way out of there. I remember driving out of the gates and thinking, I have just escaped hell. And I just got out of there. And I couldn't believe I was alive.
Much to her horror, Maria says she learns that she's not the only family member who has allegedly been assaulted by the couple.
Earlier that summer, Maria says Ghislaine and Jeffrey had flown Maria's little sister Annie to New Mexico, to his ranch. And the idea was, they told her, that she would join a group of students there to do some college planning.
But when she gets there, there's no other students that are there. Maria finds out that Annie was sexually assaulted by Epstein and Maxwell.
I don't know how to explain this, but she is my whole world. I went to her and I said, we need to go to the police.
So Maria Farmer returns to New York and reports to a police precinct near Epstein's house about what Epstein had done to her for assault. And the police tell her, well, this might actually be a case for the FBI.
I reported to the FBI that night. I reported they trafficked my sister, and I thought, I can't let this happen.
But nothing ever seems to actually happen with any of these reports. It's unclear what type of follow-up or investigation ever actually occurred.
Even in 1996, did Jeffrey Epstein have the power to quash a federal investigation? Nearly a decade later, the Teflon financier continues his ascent and deepens his connections to major players.
He came on the scene very quickly with like a bolt of lightning. All of a sudden, he was there, and he had all this money, and he was taking everybody on his private plane.
President Clinton was looking for someone to fly him to Africa on a private jet, and Jeffrey agrees to take the president. Kevin Spacey was on that trip, Chris Tucker, comedian, was on that trip, Ghislaine Maxwell, and several other girls were on that trip.
In 2002, the editor of Vanity Fair, Graydon Carter, is intrigued with Jeffrey Epstein. He wants to know, who is this guy and how did he make all this money? And he asks one of his star correspondents and writers, Vicky Ward, to dig in, do the story, and research how this guy got to where he was.
In her reporting, Ward discovers the criminal complaints Maria and Annie Farmer filed.
Vanity Fair contacted me, and they really, really wanted to do an article about Jeffrey Epstein, and they knew everything. Vicki Ward knew everything that had happened to me. She knew all the bad things. She knew enough to know this was a very dangerous man. And she knew that he had harmed my sister, who was 16.
When Vicki Ward was working on her story, I guess she had asked Jeffrey about Maria Farmer and her sister, and that's when Jeffrey went full blast to try and stop the story. Jeffrey somehow got into Vanity Fair's office one day, and it was unnerving, to say the least. Vicki was pregnant when she was doing the story with twins, and he said he was going to put a curse on her. It frightened her for whatever reason.
In the end, Epstein's campaign to drop Maria and Annie Farmer from the article works.
Jeffrey said to Graydon, take out the women. And Graydon did. I wouldn't have, but Graydon did.
I gave up everything for the truth. All I wanted was for people to know the truth. And I found that most people do not want to hear the truth in this case. I remember thinking that this guy, he could get away with anything.
Now, Maria is terrified. She leaves New York, leaves the art world, and goes into hiding. It'll be another decade before her voice is heard. But for Jeffrey Epstein, he's just getting started.
Jeffrey Epstein begins his 18-month sentence. As part of the sweetheart deal his lawyers made with U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta.
He's allowed out on work release during the day to go to an office where we now know he's meeting with other people on his staff, which included young girls. And then he goes back to sleep at the jail at night.
This convicted child sex offender is still being granted access to young girls, all while he's supposed to be in prison serving a sentence. It's like it was just business as usual for Jeffrey Epstein.
I mean, this was not a hard time. No.
In July 2009, Epstein is released early on good behavior.
Once his sentence is over, he's secreted out of jail, no one knows about it, and he gets to go home.
His lawyers work to reduce his legal restrictions.
They argued that Jeffrey shouldn't be put on the sexual offender list. I was there in court. And the judge came out and said, are you kidding me? I mean, thank God it was a legitimate judge, but how could you?
It was later discovered that Mr. Epstein continued molesting young girls even after he was allowed out of jail here in South Florida, and that there were additional victims up in the New York area. The federal government should have charged Epstein with, at the time, sex trafficking, and by not doing so, they allowed Epstein to continue to prey on women for another 12 years.
Since Epstein was not held accountable in criminal court, some of his victims turned to the civil courts in search of justice.
Several of the attorneys representing the victims begin to file civil cases against Epstein for restitution on behalf of their clients.
I wanted Epstein to know that despite his wealth, despite his power, despite who he felt he held influence over, I didn't care. I didn't care who he was. He wasn't going to intimidate me, and I was going to ask him the most personal, embarrassing question I could possibly think of.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Is it true, sir, that you have what's been described as an egg-shaped penis?
The deposition is adjourned.
My hope was the question alone would get him upset, that he'd slip up. He'd get mad at me. He essentially pled the fifth to every question that was asked of him.
Leslie Wexner fires him formally, but Epstein's already made enough money and has all the contacts in the world he needed. And so he begins to fix his reputation.
My name is R. Corey Hay. I am a publicist and columnist and reporter in New York City. So I wear a couple different hats. The publicist is brought in to tell the story of the client. So it's about repairing your reputation if it's repairable. As a gossip columnist, I've always had my ear to the ground, so to speak. So I would hear odd stories about Jeffrey.
Epstein reaches out to Hay, seeking advice.
I would never have worked for Jeffrey Epstein. I only went to see that house, to put on my reporter's hat and get a story. On the first visit, we walked out of the office and up some stairs and back to a very grand baronial room. There was Jeffrey seated at the end, quite imperious with his fabulous gray hair and not dressed up, no suit, no tie. And he's quite disarming and charming. Basically, he said he was unhappy that all the stories about him started with Jeffrey Epstein's a billionaire pedophile. So he said, I'm just tired of reading stories that start this way. And I looked up at the chandelier, and there was a blow-up doll in it, a sex doll. Okay. It was getting weirder and weirder, but even I was sucked in. It was fascinating. So I went, well, Jeffrey, you got to go to Bill Gates and Melinda immediately and pledge your entire fortune. You need to give $1.5 billion immediately, outright, not a few deaths. Give it right now. Then I said you had to go into professional rehab for 1 year. She looked at me like, 1 year? I said, 1 year. One of the sex clinics where he could get real help.
In the end, Epstein doesn't take most of the advice, and Mr. Hay is glad he didn't.
I'm not interested in getting Jeffrey Epstein off the hook because these girls, they'll never be off the hook.
Epstein does try one new tack.
He began recreating himself, calling himself a philanthropist, interested in the sciences and in education. He gave Harvard $6 million in total, and everybody bought that hook, line, and sinker. MIT, Stanford, I mean, even Bill Gates invested $2 million on behalf of Epstein.
Now, people are ashamed they took the money, but they took it because the world runs on money.
He was accepted back in society here in New York, which is disgraceful.
Bill Gates, Prince Andrew, a long line of important people. They were all still friendly with Jeffrey after his conviction.
And then Epstein starts getting invitations to scientific conferences and high society parties with bold-faced names like Katie Couric, Jeff Bezos, and Elon Musk. He is still the convicted pedophile billionaire, but nobody seems to care. Epstein's masterful ability to manipulate celebrities and power brokers continues uninterrupted. Would anything stop him from terrorizing more young girls?
When Jeffrey Epstein reemerges onto the New York social scene, he quickly reconnects with a powerful old friend, His Royal Highness, Prince Andrew.
Jeffrey's out a year or so. He's in New York, and he and Prince Andrew are caught strolling around Central Park. Not a good look.
Prince Andrew in the late 80s was really seen as a party boy. Tabloids called him Randy Andy, someone who was a womanizer. You know, he said he was loved beautiful women and had a lot of girlfriends, had a lot of dates, had a lot of parties. And I think under it all was really the expectation of Andrew that women would fall at his feet, that women would see him and be absolutely fascinated by him. We know that Ghislaine introduced Epstein to Prince Andrew not long after she arrived in New York City, and that they started spending more and more time together, Epstein and Prince Andrew, in the early 2000s. And we start to see Epstein being invited to royal parties and royal properties. Jeffrey Epstein was really introduced to the British public in 2010 with a bang. That was really shocking because what was Andrew doing walking with this convicted paedophile in New York City?
Things really take a turn in 2011 when a photo of the prince and a young girl surfaces in the UK press. It was allegedly taken at Ghislaine Maxwell's flat in London. And the girl is Virginia Roberts, who claims to have entered Epstein's sordid world at the age of 15 by unhappy accident.
Virginia Roberts' father worked at Mar-a-Lago, and so he gets her a job there.
So Ghislaine and Epstein are having lunch at Mar-a-Lago, and Ghislaine walks into the ladies' room, and Virginia Roberts is the bathroom attendant, working part-time.
So Maxwell's like, oh, wow, are you interested in massage? I know this wealthy man who, he might actually pay for you to be trained as a masseuse. And Virginia Roberts is like, wow, this is great. I could get like a professional license.
So Ghislaine then introduces her to Epstein that afternoon.
Virginia says she agreed to meet Maxwell and Epstein at his Palm Beach mansion the same day.
Virginia Roberts' father dropped her off there. It was his understanding that Ghislaine Maxwell would be kind of like chaperoning and overseeing his daughter. And so when Virginia goes up, she's a little bit weirded out by like, why is this guy laying in a towel? And she's like, okay, must be how massage therapy as a profession it works. It's Maxwell is basically massaging Epstein and showing her, do it like this, rub him like this. And then Epstein at some point flips over and she is sexually assaulted, and Maxwell is there the whole time. And at the end, they pay her a couple $100 and say, you did great, and when can you come back?
Virginia says she was sexually abused in the past, and I think that may have set her up as easy prey for a predator like Epstein. She would later say that she came to believe during this time that this was normal. The lifestyle with Epstein was the way life was just supposed to be. Pretty sad.
He grooms her, which is what these traffickers do. They groom you, first to trust them, to believe that they're the only ones who are going to take care of you, to love you, to protect you.
And then over a period of time, she was sort of like a long-term employee who was then pimped out to other rich, powerful men around the world.
He begins to loan her out to his rich male friends. And so one of them happens to be, according to Virginia, Prince Andrew.
Jeffrey Epstein's plane was nicknamed the Lolita Express, named after Nabokov's famous novel Lolita, in which a college professor has sex with a 12-year-old girl.
Photos of the plane's luxurious interior were taken when the Lolita Express was put up for sale. They later surfaced in the tabloids.
Ghislaine told me proudly the private plane that she and Jeffrey Epstein used was wired for audio and video. She was more than hinting that the purpose of this was blackmail, to insulate themselves, to protect themselves.
I bet Jeffrey saved the videotapes because he enjoyed looking at them. He was probably a voyeur. He was clearly a pervert. And then, of course, there was that backup. You could use those tapes as leverage if you got in trouble.
But at some point, I think it was March of 2001, this is a series of flights into Europe that Virginia Roberts is on Epstein's plane. And one of the flights lands at London's Luton Airport. According to Virginia, Ghislaine Maxwell takes her out shopping, dresses her up. It's like, oh, you're going to meet a prince tonight.
And then we get in the car, and Ghislaine tells me in the car that I have to do what I do for Jeffrey for Prince Andrew. And that's when I learned what was going to happen.
And to Virginia Roberts, she's like, oh my God, even these royal people are just as sick and depraved as he is. But she basically goes out dancing with him.
When we went to Club Tramp, and he danced with me, and he sweats a lot, and he smells funny. And that's the very first time I met him. And that's right before I was abused by him.
My client is a London woman who recalls seeing Prince Andrew and Virginia Roberts together at that London nightclub in 2001, just as Virginia Roberts says. Prince Andrew was smiling, happy, having a great time. Virginia was not. Virginia looked very sullen and quiet.
According to Virginia's legal filings, on Epstein's order, she had sex with the prince.
You cannot say no to these people. And of course, there is sadness, there is anger, there's scars that will never heal, ever. You're not even acknowledged as being alive or there or important or cared for or worried about in any way. None of those human emotions were attached to me when I was trafficked to Prince Andrew.
Prince Andrew denies all of these allegations, but Virginia Roberts also states in legal filings that she's had sexual encounters with other associates of Jeffrey Epstein's. One of the most notable, Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz denied the allegations too, and because of that, Virginia Roberts sued him for defamation. And in a totally bizarre turn, he sued her right back.
Did you ever see Mr. Epstein with underage girls?
No. Oh, no. If I had ever seen Jeffrey Epstein in any inappropriate situation with an underage girl, I would have terminated my relationship and turned him in. No way. This is a woman with a long, long record of lying for money.
I was always disgusted that there were so many people involved. It was the elite of the world. It was people who run the world. It was the most powerful people in the world.
Finally, after 3 years of alleged abuse, Virginia manages to escape Epstein's grasp.
Epstein had proposed to her that she give him a child. And so he sends her to Thailand to bring back a 12-year-old.
Virginia goes to Thailand, but the thought of procuring a 12-year-old girl for Epstein gives her the strength to escape.
She meets this young man, and they fall in love instantly, and they instantly marry. And she calls Epstein from Thailand and says, "I'm never coming back." For a number of years, she went into hiding until she received a phone call from the FBI.
The FBI approached Virginia Roberts concerning Epstein when they were doing their investigation, and she handed over the photograph to the FBI.
Virginia files a defamation suit against Ghislaine Maxwell and a civil suit seeking damages against her as well.